Good afternoon. I hope you all are having a good day. This PowerPoint presentation is focused on the transition piece of the IEP. The purpose of transition is to positively influence the likelihood of graduation and promote successful outcomes for students through planning and preparation for adult life. Transition services originated with the 1990 amendments to the IDEA. Why were they revised? Because students receiving special ed services were not having success after high school. There was a lot of problems. They weren't ready. So transition services are intended to help move students toward their post-secondary goals. As with the other parts of the IEP, there are federal regulations to guide you. So 343 is the federal regulation that defines transition services. It says, transition services means a coordinated set of activities for a child with a disability that is designed to be within a results-oriented process that is focused on improving the academic and functional achievement of the child with a disability to facilitate the child's movement from school to post-school activities, including post-secondary education, vocational education, integrated employment, included supported employment or working with a job coach possibly, continuing and adult education, adult services, independent living, or community participation. Is based on the individual child's needs, taking into account the child's strengths, preferences, and interests, and includes pieces of instruction, related services, community experiences, the development of employment and other post-school adult living objectives, and if appropriate, acquisition of daily living skills and provision of a functional vocational evaluation if they need it. Transition services for children with disabilities may be special education if provided as special education, as specially designed instruction, or a related service, if it's required to assist a child with a disability to benefit from special education. The next regulation that involves transition is 300-320. It's in the definition of an education program. So, as used in this part, the term Individualized Education Program, or IEP, means a written statement for each child with a disability that is developed, reviewed, and revised in a meeting in accordance with 300-320 through 300-324, and that must include transition services beginning not later than the first IEP to be in effect when the child turns 16, or younger if determined appropriate by the IEP team, and updated annually thereafter. The IEP must include appropriate measurable post-secondary goals based upon age-appropriate transition assessments related to training, education, employment, and where appropriate, independent living skills. And the transition services, including courses of studies, need to assist the child in reaching those goals. As used in this part, the term Individualized Education Program, or IEP, means a written statement for each child with a disability that is developed, reviewed, and revised in a meeting in accordance with 300-320 through 300-324. And it must include the transfer of rights of age of majority, beginning not later than 1 year before the child reaches the age of maturity under state law. The IEP must include a statement that the child has been informed of the child's rights under Part B of the Act, if any, that will transfer to the child on reaching the age of majority under 300-520. This is really an important piece of the IEP. As the student nears their age of majority, which most of the time is 18 in most states, you will need to make sure that the parents understand that once their child reaches 18, the child can make decisions without parental consent just like any other child. That means that at age 18, the student could say they don't want their parents at the IEP. That usually doesn't happen, but it could. Parents need to be prepared and understand this. Some parents of students with disabilities think that because their child has a disability, that they as the parent will continue to be responsible to make all educational, legal, and medical decisions, and this is not the case. A child reaches age of majority and can then make their own decisions. If the student with a disability who is of age signs a contract like to rent an apartment, it's a legal contract. The parent has no say, and unless they decide to become their child's legal guardian. This has to be done through the court system and decided on by a judge, and it can be a very emotional decision as their child has to have their own attorney. So you're taking the rights away from your child. And it doesn't matter the severity of the disability. It can be a learning disability, it can be a severe cognitive impairment. It makes no difference. When the child turns 18, they become their own person just like any other person. If a parent says that they are their child's guardian, you need to ask for legal documentation, as once again, many parents of students with disabilities think they automatically become their child's guardian when the child turns 18 because the student has a disability. And I'm going to go over in the documents in the IEP when I do some examples of completing the transition activities, the page that you need to use to look at the age of majority discussion. And sometimes those conversations that we're talking about are very difficult. So you need to start having them earlier rather than later and start helping the parent become prepared for the things that are going to take place. The next regulation refers to the IEP team. So the public agency must ensure that the IEP team for each child with a disability includes transition services participants. In accordance with paragraph A7 of this section, the public agency must invite a child with a disability to attend the child's IEP team meeting if things will be considered of post-secondary goals for the child and the transition services needed to assist the child in reaching those goals under 300-320. If the child does not attend the IEP team meeting, the public agency must take other steps to ensure that the child's preferences and interests are considered. To the extent appropriate, with the consent of the parents or a child who has reached the age of majority, in implementing the requirements of paragraph B1 of this section, the public agency must invite a representative of any participating agency that is likely to be responsible for providing or paying for transition services. When the IEP is being developed, the parent has to be invited and provided notice. The parent has to have notice and must consent if an outside agency representative, like someone from Michigan Rehabilitation Services, Community Mental Health, Goodwill, any of those agencies, anybody who may provide services for the blind, is going to pay for job coaching, whatever. The parent has to be informed that they're going to be invited to the IEP, and the parent has to provide consent for those representatives to be invited, as those people do not at that moment have educational relevance until their services are added in. So they don't have any reason to work with the student until they get the information and forms are signed, and they're going to take over, like be a case manager or whatever for the student. So once again, parent has to be notified that they're going to be invited and has to provide consent to allow them to be at the IEP. If the parent does not consent, those individuals cannot be invited to the IEP. Secondary transition. When do you begin? It's required to be in effect not later than the first IEP when the student turns 16. It's recommended that you begin not later than 14. Transition activities can be included earlier than age 16 if the IEP determines that that is the best for the individual student. So if you are developing the student's IEP for the next school year, if the IEP goes into effect, say, May 25th, 2016, so you're writing it in the spring and it's going to take effect that day, and the student's going to turn 16 anytime between May 25th, 2016 and May 25th, 2017, when the next IEP will be written, you have to include transition services in the IEP. Transition activities can be added into any IEP before the student turns 16 if the team determines that the student needs to begin working on those activities earlier in order to have a better chance of success when they get out of school. It may take some students longer to work through activities, so it all depends on the individual student. You don't have to wait until the student will be turning 16. Remember, students with disabilities can be supported until they're 26, and oftentimes throughout the school year, academics are focused on, and it's not until the student is getting ready to graduate that parents start to think about their student and what they're going to do after high school. That's why, as a special educator, you should be looking at the student's transition before they go into middle or high school, when traditionally schools start to talk to students about their post-secondary goals. The earlier independent skills and vocational skills and community participation skills are thought about, the more successful students can be, as we can provide opportunities and supported activities to help them work towards those post-secondary goals and being independent. It's also good for the parent to be part of this process as you move forward. Sometimes it takes a while to get the parent to realize that strictly working on academics may not be preparing their student for transition out of high school. Sometimes it's important to work on those soft skills and getting along with people and working in teams and being independent, getting from place to place. And as you start working on those activities, if you do a little bit at a time, it helps the parent prepare. So transition activities are like goals, and they have to be monitored for progress. Even though there's no real area on the IEP to report the progress, you still have to look and make a determination whether the activities were completed before you can move on to the next activity. So as with goals and objectives and accommodations, transition activities have to be monitored and checked on. So it's important to gather information from the student related to their vision of their life after high school. There are a lot of ways to get this information. You can use interest inventories, and you should give them to the student and the parent so you can kind of see what the student's thinking and what the parent's thinking. Informal conversation with the students, activities in the classroom where you're getting information about what the student's interested in, observations of the student, what their skills are like. Many schools do an educational development plan, and you kind of work through what classes they're going to take and what activities so that they're working towards getting to that goal. And vocational assessments. Some students go, Goodwill provides vocational assessments to look at students' job skills and their readiness for employment. So this is part of the assessment information that needs to be reviewed to determine the student's strengths and weaknesses and the needs in the PLAF. There are a lot of different transition survey forms that can be used. There's not just one that you have to use. So you can do some research and find one that works to provide you with the information you're going to need to work with the students that you have. You need to gather information from the student as to what their vision is. Some students are nonverbal, so this can be difficult. There are picture surveys to help determine those students' interests so they can point and choose things. The information is gathered, and the team determines if the student needs transition activities to support their needs and work toward their post-secondary goals. They may or may not. Some students are more independent and prepared than other students. As part of your case study, I've included a transition survey that the special ed teacher completed with Sarah, and you can use that information to help you complete your draft transition plan. So developing the transition plan. The plan is based on the student's needs, taking into account their strengths, preferences, and interests in the following areas. What instruction do they need? What related services are they looking at? Community experiences that they've had, employment and post-school living objectives, and daily living skills. So you start out by gathering information from the student to see where their areas of interest lie, what they would like to do, where they think they might need help, and then you develop the activities based on that. So here are some examples of transition activities for different areas. So if the student's looking, depending on what they want, some instruction might be trade school classes, remedial classes to help them improve reading or math skills to be able to take college level courses later, maybe a cooking class to be able to make their own meals. Related services include things like Michigan Rehab, Goodwill, community mental health services, services for the blind, possibly speech therapy or physical therapy. Community experiences would be working to join a club, maybe get on a bowling team, join the YMCA, get a library card, go to a theater, go to a movie, attend, go to a museum, those kinds of things that are regularly happening in the community. Some students need help making friends and joining groups, so they may need some assistance doing those things. Employment and other post-school adult living objectives like do job shadowing experiences, learn how to fill out a resume, apply for a job, do a career exploration class, complete an application for college, do a college visit. Any of those things would be activities. Daily living skills might be opening a bank account, doing laundry, making their own food, brushing their teeth, getting their driver's license. A student may need activities in all or none of these areas to help prepare them to be independent after high school. The student may have a job after school that they got for themselves, so they may not need any community experiences or those kinds of things because they already know how to do that. So in that instance, you would say none needed. But if you say none needed, you have to give a reason why none, like no activities are needed. So you could say the student currently has a job that they found on their own and no assistance is necessary. So you can't just say none needed, none needed, none needed, because it looks like then the student doesn't need any help in anything, and that you just wrote that as an easy way out. So look at what the student needs and then make a determination if you need activities or not. Remember, transition activities need to relate to the student's post-secondary vision. Gather information from the student. The activities need to be sequential. You can't just do a whole bunch of random activities. So if you have a student who wants to live independently, maybe one of the first things that you do is have them talk to somebody at an apartment, a manager at apartments, to find out what it's like to, rent an apartment. Maybe they don't know that you have to have the first and the last month's rent, and that some apartments include utilities and some don't, and so that you have to sign a year's lease. So maybe they need to go talk to somebody about renting an apartment. Then the next thing would be maybe they need to go look at some apartments and find out where apartments are located and how much different apartments cost, like a 1 and 2 bedroom, those kinds of things. And maybe they need to fill out a lease form so they get used to doing those things. So it's sequential. They finish the first thing and then they do the next thing and then they do the next thing. It's a coordinated set of activities to get them to a place of independence. Transition activities need to be checked on and completed like goals, and they have to be assigned to someone. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's a school person. It could be the student's family. If it's job shadowing, it might be Goodwill employees, those kinds of things. So you have to relate it to the vision, you have to check on them, they have to be coordinated, and you have to assign them to somebody. And usually put a date for completion. And we'll look at that when I go over the form. And how do you make sure that you're including everything, that it's right? Well, there's a checklist that you can use that the state uses to monitor compliance of districts with transition. And there are 6 questions. And the answer to all 6 questions has to be yes in order for you to be compliant. And this is what the checklist looks like. And when I say SPP 13, it's because there's a state performance plan indicator, and the state has indicators written in different areas, and transition is SPP 13, and that's one of the areas that they check for school districts to be compliant. So you're going to answer 6 questions as you're writing your IEP. The student was invited to the IEP team meeting. When they're 16, they have to be invited. Before that, it's a really good thing for them to be invited, but at 16, they have to be invited. So if the student's 16 and you have not invited them to the IEP, you're not in compliance. So when you write out the invitation for a student that's 16, you always make sure the student is included. You don't just invite the parent and hope they're inviting the student. The student's name has to go on the invitation. The student's post-secondary vision is identified. A yes must include evidence of that the vision was updated, the update was based on age-appropriate transition assessments, and the post-secondary vision is measurable. So if the student says they want to be employed and be independent after high school, that was something that we could measure. But you have to have evidence that you've gathered the student's interest, so that's why you do a transition survey with them. Number 3, the IEP identifies the current student's academic achievement. So in the PLAF statement, when you're putting goals, when you're putting that baseline data in, that's saying the student's functioning on a 4th grade reading level, those pieces, that's academic achievement. Functional performance, remember you write that functional performance statement where you talk about how the student's functioning independently. Maybe the student needs, where you write about the student needs to work on math skills so that they'll be able to balance their checkbook. You're looking for functional performance. How is the student getting along and being independent? And then transition-related needs. So you need, is there anything that the student needs help with activity-wise? So you think about those things when you're building the transition plan, and that's where you would go to look for this piece. Are there transition-related needs? Do they need help with employment? Do they need help with community participation? Do they need help doing career exploration? Then for number 4, the IEP identifies transition services, including courses of study, and there's a place in the IEP to talk about courses of study, aligned with the post-secondary vision. So if the student says they want to be an artist and we don't see any art classes in their course of study, then there's not a connection there. So you have to look at what the student's vision is. If they want to be a machine operator or a mechanic, has the student taken a automotive class? Is there something outside of school that they can take? You know, are they doing those things? Are they in a job that helps them learn how to be a mechanic or a job shadow piece? And then number 5, if any agency is likely to provide or pay for transition services, then prior consent to invite the agency was obtained from the parent or student if the student is of age of majority. So if you're going to invite somebody from Goodwill, you've obtained prior consent, and there's a letter that you can use to do that, or a form that you can use to get that so you have it documented, and that should be included with the IEP. We're not going to worry too much about the form. It's just that you need to know that there has to be prior consent from the parent to invite an outside agency representative to the IEP. And if you don't have documentation of that, then you're going to have to get that and maybe rewrite the IEP. And that a representative from an identified agency was invited to the IEP team meeting if it's necessary. And they would be included on the IEP, and you would see that on the IEP because they'd sign in. And then number 6, the IEP identifies at least one measurable annual IEP goal that's aligned with the post-secondary vision. So if the student wants to go to college and they're on a 5th grade reading level, and you have identified an annual goal that's going to help them increase their reading skills, that would be connected to their post-secondary vision. So let's do a little practice. So you have a 16-year-old student who wants to go to school to be a welder. And here's some information about them. They have a reading level at 4th grade. They want to live independently. Right now they don't have a driver's license. They're frequently absent from school. They have a part-time after-school job at a machine shop, and they're a member of a local 4-H club. So that's what they're telling you in their information. Then we have to look and say, do they need any help in the area of adult living? Well, they don't have a driver's license, so that's possibly something in adult living. So we could say as a transition activity that they are going to find information about what it takes to get a driver's license. Okay? Daily living skills. Well, they want to live independently. They have a part-time job. They don't have a driver's license, so can they take a bus? Can they take public transportation? If they can't, then one of their daily living skills might be to find out if there's a bus route available. And then that would be the first activity. Remember, the activities have to be coordinated. So I could write, number 1, the student will find out if there's a bus route available near them to get them to work. And then once they do that, then the second thing would be that they would go and ride the bus to get to work. And then the check on that would be that they actually did it and got to work on time. So those would be coordinated activities. First they're checking if there's a route, then they're actually riding the bus to work. Okay? That's what it means by coordinated activities. You put them in steps. Things that are going to help the student become more independent. Does this student need a functional vocational evaluation? Well, they already have a job, so maybe the student's had it for 6 months or a year, so obviously he can find a job and keep a job. So under functional vocational evaluation, I'd write no help necessary. Okay, it's been considered, no assistance needed, because the student already has a job. Remember, you have to say that you've considered it, it's been considered, and the student doesn't need assistance, they already have a job. They found a job on the outside on their own. And you have to tell why. Employment, well, he wants to be a welder. And right now he's working at a machine shop, so that's good, he's getting some experience. But for employment, and we're talking about post-school employment, so maybe he needs to do some career exploration and learn about a welding job. What does it take to become a welder? What's the outlook for job outcomes? So that would be the first thing. Then the second thing after he finds some information would be possibly to locate programs that train welders maybe close to him, because remember, he doesn't have a car. So the next thing would be to look into programs. Then the next thing, once he finds some programs, is to decide on one or two and then apply to those programs. So those are coordinated activities, remember? Community experiences, he's a member of a local 4-H club, so he does do that. Maybe there's a metal crafting club that you could connect him up with. But it seems like he's out there in the community, so it may or may not be, you may or may not need to help him with community experiences in order to be an independent, successful adult. Related services would be maybe like I said, Goodwill, Michigan Rehab. The student's already working and being successful, so that may not be it. But related services, possibly you could look at his driver's license. What's it going to take to get a driver's license? But we already took care of that in adult living. Further education. He might need to take some trade school classes to be a welder. So he would once again need to be looking at what does it take to be a welder, and then looking at programs. And others could be anything else that, that other kind is a catch-all. If you forgot to put something in somewhere else, you can use other and add it there. So let's look at one other student. This is a 17-year-old student, and the student's in a wheelchair. They are verbal, they have use of their upper body, they want to get a job, they have a 7th grade reading level, they want to be as independent as possible and potentially live in an apartment. However, they have low math skills. So we could look at adult living. Can the student, do they have toileting skills? Can they dress themselves? Those are some adult living skills that they may need to have. And you can add those also into daily living skills. Under adult living skills, can they ride transportation independently? So is there a bus or something that they can use and get to a job independently? Can they get to the bank? Can they budget money because they have low math skills? So that would be an adult living skill. Daily living skill, once again, getting themselves dressed, doing those pieces. Can they do those things in order to live independently because that's their vision? Functional vocational evaluation, the student doesn't currently have a job, so you may want to find out what exactly their skills are. Can they answer the telephone? Can they work for 8 hours a day? Those are some pieces that, how fast can they work? Those are some pieces and information you may want to gather. So this student you may want to do a functional vocational evaluation on. That would be possibly with Goodwill, so you'd have to invite an outside agency potentially. Employment, student wants to get a job, so maybe they've never filled out an application. So one of the things that they'd have to do is work on filling out an application, develop a resume, possibly look in the paper and find 3 jobs that they're interested in, and then complete applications for those. So those are coordinated sets of activities. And you just write brief statements. Student will locate 3 jobs in the paper. That'll be one thing. The student will complete an application for each of the 3 jobs. The student will go to a job interview. Okay? You could write all 3 of those underneath employment because they're working towards getting a job, which is what they want to do. But those are things that they can't do on their own and haven't done, and so that's the activity you're helping them do to become independent and reach their vision. Community experiences. Doesn't say really anything that the student's in any clubs, so You could go, the student will visit a museum, or the student will join a school club as one piece to get started. The student will possibly go to the library on their own, or those kinds of things. So how can you get them out in the community and get participating? Further education, the student might need some classes. Say they get a job being working in an office. Maybe they need some typing classes or those kinds of things, something extra. So they may need to look at the jobs that they're interested in and determine if they need further education and whether or not you need help. Sometimes the parents are very helpful and they've already taken their student to look at those courses. If that's the case, you would not need to do anything related to further education. You would say this has been considered, but the family has taken the student to apply for courses for a typing course. So those are the pieces that you would do for that student. So those are just some examples of things you could write as transition activities. So at this point, if you have any questions, make sure to get in touch with me or bring your questions up in the discussion to see what your classmates have to say about what your question is. So once again, get in contact with me if you have any questions.